All right, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to go through a browser tier list with most of the weight being given to privacy and security. In this case, with browsers, typically privacy and security are kind of tied to the same things. So like having an ad block increases both security and privacy. So anyway, let's just go ahead and get started. And so I'll just cover the tiers here real quick. We have our Sugoi tier list. We have our
Not great, not terrible.
tiers. We have the
Nope.
tier, and then we have the niche tier because there's going to be a couple of things that go into there. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so let's get started with Brave. This is a hot topic for a lot of people that have people tend to get really passionate about this browser. So let me go ahead and cover a couple of things with Brave. Typically, what people get really worked up about is the crypto stuff inside of Brave. And the thing is you can shut all this garbage off. Like if you go to the browser settings, you're like, oh, well, I don't want to use the VPN or I don't want to use the wallet or anything like that. It's like, okay, we'll just turn it off then. It's not a big deal. You just come in here, you make some changes, you turn off the analytics that they collect, so you can turn this stuff off. You can turn up the security settings a little bit, and you can also turn off all the Brave stuff, all the Brave reward, crypto token, all that kind of stuff. You're not required to have any of that stuff enabled. Now, the one thing I'm going to mention with Brave is you do have the option to browse the internet with Tor. I don't think that's a good idea. It's been covered quite a bit in the community already. If you're going to be browsing around on Onion websites, you should always use the Tor browser, but it is an option. If you want to use Tor within Brave, that is an option that you have. Just be aware that it's not nearly as private and secure as using the Tor browser. The one other complaint that can legitimately be held against Brave is that it is built off of Chromium, and I do think that's a legitimate complaint because the more user base that Chromium has, aka Google, the more control they have over the internet, the worse that it can make the browsing experience for people, and we're about to cover that here in just a moment. So Brave, I'm going to place in the not great. Basically, it would be like an A tier. Like, it's a really good browser, just with the biggest objection that people have, and that, like I said, it's a legitimate complaint, is that it is tied to Chromium. Okay, now let's get on to Chrome, because there's stuff to unpack with this one. Now, the thing with Chrome, it is a fast browser, and like, as far as functionality, it's probably one of the smoothest browsers out there. I've used a lot of browsers. I mean, it does work really well. There's some significant problems with it, though. First of all, there's stories out there that you can go read, and I get that this story is from over 5 years ago, but anyone that doesn't, at this point, acknowledge by now that Google makes much of their revenue off of advertising, and advertising means collecting data and analytics on its users. I mean, it's a huge privacy issue, and so you can go read about this. This is one of many articles out there. The other thing that I'm sure people are well aware of at this point, so I didn't see a need to pull up in articles, the stuff that's going on between Google and ad blockers right now. You could go watch a previous video that I made talking about malvertising and how it can give you viruses, and I actually covered it again not too long ago in one of my more recent videos, that even as of just a few weeks ago, Google ads are still being used to spread malware. I fucking hate advertisements. I do not want to see them. They have become completely overboard, and they've ruined the internet experience. Like, if I didn't have an ad blocker, I really wouldn't have much interest in using the internet. I'd probably use it for a few critical things, but this garbage of going to a website and then you're bombarded with a 30-second ad to watch a 1-minute video, I mean, that kind of stuff's just ridiculous that people are having to go through that. Or like, you go watch these podcasts on YouTube, and every 15 minutes, there's a 1 or 2 minute ad break. It's like, this has gotten just as bad as TV now. And then the fact that it can also spread viruses to your computer. I think it's a bunch of garbage. The other issue with Google is that I would suggest people go and research is Manifest version 3. Currently, there's Manifest version 2. Version 3 is in the process of being rolled out. I think June 2024, I think it's kind of like the tentative deadline of where it's basically going to be fully rolled out. And at that point, you could go look at also some recent articles that Google is doing things like they want to be able to slow down the updates that AdBlock gets, so that people that are on like Chrome, for example, or anything that uses Manifest version 3, you're not going to be able to use something like uBlock Origin to work around all this advertising garbage. And then there's also been talk that they just want to block ad blockers completely, which, like I said, it would ruin the internet, having to experience it with all the ads. The other thing that you could go check out is the web environment integrity. That is another thing that I would suggest people get familiar with if you're going to be using Chrome browsers. Is WEI is basically this nasty DRM that it's supposed to enhance trusted computing. That's these words that keep getting thrown around. Basically, what it is that it's DRM that's going to be super invasive, and Google can basically lock down your browser so much that it's to the point where if you want to go browse a website, and let's say you're connected to Firefox and the web had this web environment integrity rolled out, is that it could block your browser from being able to access it, and you'd be forced to use something like Chrome. I think it's absolutely garbage what's going on there. And so this one is a big absolute turd. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Now, Edge is an interesting use case, and here's why I say that. So there's a feature set built into Windows Defender. Now, you can only use this on Pro Edition. You can't use it on Home because you do have to have Hyper-V in order to be able to use this. But there is an option to turn on isolated browsing. It's called Microsoft Defender Application Guard, and it works with Microsoft Edge to where it opens websites in a Hyper-V container. So you can come in here and enable this. Like I said, you do have to have Hyper-V, which means you have to have Windows Pro Edition. And so you can come in here and change, so you could change settings, and here's the things that it protects you against. So it can protect you against quite a bit of malware, and this is built in because of Windows Defender settings. Now, if you open up Microsoft Edge, you can go into the settings page and turn on a whole bunch of stuff. Now, there's other stuff in here in the security settings where you can scroll down and turn on enhanced security mode. This takes advantage of some more Windows Defender settings. If you go watch the advanced Windows Defender feature set, it does things like hardware enforced stack protection, which is good for like malicious drivers. So you could turn like this on, and this would affect your computer as well, which is good. I do like that that is part of this. It can also break websites, so just keep that in mind. And now you can go in and turn a lot of this stuff off, but realize that because Microsoft collects a lot of data on people, because they also rely on a lot of advertising stuff, and because it's also built off of Chrome, there are those issues. And now if you do decide to go and enable that, you have to click up here on the settings bar and click New Application Guard window. Let me just go ahead and shrink the size of this down a little bit so you can see this. And so you can click this and click on New Application Guard window. And so when you do that, that means that sites that you visit are ran inside of a Hyper-V container. So it is a little more secure. The other thing is you can also install uBlock Origin, so you get the benefits of AdBlock plus running it inside of a container. So normally, because of the circumstances, I would say that Edge would normally go right with Chrome. Now, the other thing is Edge is also available on Linux. Now, I don't know why in the hell people would use Microsoft Edge on Linux. I guess that's an option if people wanted it. I sure as hell wouldn't recommend using it on Linux. So if we're looking at it from the privacy or the security perspective, and you're going to run on Windows Pro and you're going to use Defender Application Guard, then what I would do is put this in niche, because if you're going to use that extra set of security features and we're taking that into account, but we're ignoring the privacy problems and the fact that it's built on Chrome, then it would get an S tier just because of those extra security features. That actually does do quite a bit. But again, because of the privacy issues there, I really don't like the idea of using it. Now, the next one on our list is going to be Vivaldi. I'm hoping I pronounced that correct. I like the browser. I do think it's pretty good. There are some things that I don't particularly care for with it. First of all, it tries to do a lot. Now, when you start it up here, I got it set up in a virtual machine, so I was able to get all this new stuff on here the first time set up Windows. You can come in here and select this, and you're not required to use things like the mail or calendar or any of that stuff. I do think the browser is trying to do a lot. It's not something that I care all that much for. Now, that's not something I'm heavily weighting on the score or on the tier of where this browser is. What I do care about from a very majority perspective is privacy and security. Now, this company is based out of Norway, I believe it is. And so they do have to comply with EU privacy laws, which is a good thing. Now, you can go in and turn a lot of this stuff off. This is very similar to the Brave browser in that it is also built off of Chromium, and it does have things like a built-in ad block. You don't have to go add something in after the fact. So overall, I do think it's a good browser. With all things considered, it is definitely an A-tier browser. I don't have anything against it. I do think it's a good browser, but the big thing that really holds it back for me wanting to give it an S tier is that, again, it's based off of Chromium, which is a bit of an issue. Oh, this next one is going to be a little bit interesting. I added this in here because I think there's enough people that use this browser that it warranted me talking about it, but I do have some issues with it that I'll cover briefly. I'm not going to go deep in on those issues because ultimately I think people need to make the choice for themselves. This next one is going to be the Pale Moon browser. Now the thing with this browser, it's pretty lightweight. It's pretty customizable. You can use AdBlock. You have to use like uBlock Legacy if you want to use that uBlock with the Pale Moon browser. It is lightweight and it is privacy focused. There is an issue where some of the websites on this browser have an issue rendering, which you can work around by using Pale Fill, which is something you can add on to it, which there's private or fingerprinting issues that I have with this browser just because of the small user base as compared to something like Brave, but also there's some other stuff that I'm going to briefly talk about. I'm not going to go in depth on this because I don't make personal attacks on this channel. I think that these YouTubers out there that make personal attacks against other people has done an extremely poor taste. I think it's absolutely pathetic behavior, and I'm not going to engage in that on my channel. The only time that I would ever call someone else out in a major way would be if I needed to defend myself because someone's going and making some sort of beef with me and I need to defend myself. But I do want people to be aware of this. If you are going to use the Pale Moon browser, I do think, because people are going to bring this up about the browser, at some point someone would drop this down in the comments, so I'm just going to address it now. There's two places that you can go read about this, and if you type these into Google, you'll be able to pull them up. So there's the OpenBSD and Pale Moon coordinating packages and officially branded package. And then there's this thread on the OpenBSD WIP GitHub repository, which is the Pale Moon official branding violation. So this came first. This was posted on February 4th, 2018. And it was one of the OpenBSD contributors. I'm not sure how to pronounce the guy's name, so I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. And he says that he's trying to get this working. He says he knows to distribute the officially branded binaries requires approval, which is perfectly fine, and I understand why. I thought it would be mutually beneficial to offer an officially branded Pale Moon browser through the OpenBSD package system. How would we go about being able to do that? And you'll notice here, there's a comment here from the next day that says, "Well done, you killed Pale Moon on OpenBSD, continue your good work." And there's quite a bit of heated opinions in here, which you can go read. Now what happened was, so this comment showed up here, same day, from one of the, I believe it's now a former developer. I don't follow Pale Moon closely. Actually, I don't follow Pale Moon at all. I used to think that it was a decent browser, but I've got some opinions on it regarding things like privacy and security and also the way the developers act. So this guy comes into OpenBSD, the GitHub repository, and says, "You will revise your config located at here to remove the following. We do not allow system libs to be used with official branding because it deviates from official configuration. You must comply with the directive or you must disable official branding for your builds. Additionally, you will please explain and justify the patches you are applying in this location here." And then he tags the developer from this previous thread. Now, the developer says, "I will do no such thing until I speak with the person who owns the rights to the IP, which appears to not be you. Additionally, your confrontational attitude dismisses you from any and all future discussions in the matter. I will only speak to MC Straver about this issue, and I wish to do so amicably. Your attitude demonstrates that you are unfit to be an intermediary of any sort." And so then he comes in here and tags Wolf Beast, who is, I think, the main, like the owner of Pale Moon. And then this guy keeps going on. So this guy says, "I sent him an email." And keep in mind, this developer could have just stopped talking at this point. He's already proved to be extremely rude with his behavior. And so he continues on. He says, "You could have just complied. I don't see the problem, except for this being a direct violation of terms of redistribution, so on and so forth." And it says, "This repository does not create nor distribute binaries. This repository is not official in any way." This guy says, "Awesome Moonchild will respond in his own time, but I suggest you stop being rude to me." So there's a lot of opinions on this one. Now, the thing that I want people to keep in mind is it's a very fair reaction of anyone that this developer would have this sort of reaction to someone coming in and talking to him this way. And also keep in mind that this developer came here and opened this thread first, trying to open up a line of communication where they could work on putting Pale Moon inside of OpenBSD. And then this guy comes over here and starts acting like this. And you can go read through the thread. Wolf Beast comes in here. His attitude is completely unacceptable. I think the developers over at Pale Moon are absolutely ridiculous. Now, I understand one aspect of it that a lot of people said, well, you have to defend your trademark. I get that. That's understandable, but you don't need to come over and start talking to people that way. You can come down here and read closer to the bottom of the page where one of the people says, this ridiculous. You were approached just a couple days ago. This repository is a work in progress staging area. Nothing is built or distributed to users. You attack the person doing the legwork of getting your stuff built to work on OpenBSD. You flipped out with your cease and desist against a work in progress part of a person who is actually trying to cooperate with you. I'm sure as hell I will personally stick the hell away from Pale Moon. And there's one other thing I'm also going to point out here. This guy mentioned, do you really think it's a good idea coming here and berating volunteers who put in spare time and effort into porting Pale Moon code to OpenBSD? Now, the developer for OpenBSD here, the contributor, my understanding was when he was working on this, he was going to college in New York, which means he was probably also working at least a part-time job to try to pay for college. And then he was working on this stuff on his free time. And then these devs come in here and completely flip the out over him. I think that behavior is pretty terrible coming from the open source community. It's almost like they placed their branding above being able to work with other people in the open source community. And like the other people said, it was a staging area. It's not like they were actually distributing Pale Moon. And so I think there's just too many issues here. Privacy and security and overall, that's a really terrible attitude from the developers. And I think the first guy that went in there and started that, like I said, I don't think he's part of the project anymore. You go look stuff up on Reddit. Like I said, I don't want to get into personal attacks, but anyone that would come in and start that kind of an issue with other people, it's just completely uncalled for and off base. So I don't really have anything else to add on Pale Moon. I absolutely would not recommend it to people though. Now, the next thing is Chromium and ungoogled Chromium. I'm just grouping them together. I'm not keeping them separate. They're both pretty good browsers. Like if you just take them as they are, like they're good browsers. One of the issues that I have with ungoogled Chromium is it's usually a little slow to get security updates, which could be a problem with things like 0 days. One of the things that people could go look at if you're not familiar with this, I would suggest go looking it up so you have an idea of just how bad some 0 days can be, is the WebP vulnerability. WebP is a image format. So think of this, like let's say this is a PNG or a JPEG file that's like 800 kilobytes in size. WebP came along so that you could shrink stuff down and make it so that the size is way smaller so it works better with web browsers and loading stuff. So it could take down, let's say you shrink 800 kilobytes down to 40 kilobytes. Well, now you're saving a ton of bandwidth across the internet. You're making things faster to load. But so like that was an example of a critical vulnerability came up where malware could take advantage of that. And so that's where having those fast security updates is really important. So like I said, that's one of the things I don't really like about ungoogled Chromium. But Chromium and Google Chromium, they're also, the issue is they're tied to Google, but there's really nothing that makes these stand out. You would have to go in and change some stuff. So like with regular Chromium, you would have to go in and turn off some of the Google issues, like the Google stuff that's built in. I would put this at like a B tier. It's not great, not terrible. You can call me Comrade Dyatlov, I guess, but I don't really think that it's not great, but like I said, it's not terrible. I don't know how else to put it. I guess it's just pretty average. All right, now let's talk about Tor real quick. This is a really good browser. I think if people have watched some of my last or more recent videos, I think people know how I feel about Tor. I do think onion routing is an excellent protocol. I would suggest people go look it up. If you don't know much about it and you're going to be using tech, and especially with Tor, Tor is kind of an interesting case. So I would recommend learning some stuff about it if you're going to use it. I would say it's actually really important to learn some about it. At least spend like 1 or 2 hours learning about it if you're going to use it. There's some really good documentation out there that you can find from Tor. You could also, Whonix has a lot of really good documentation on both the browser and also kind of like how Tor itself works as well. One of the things that's really important to consider with Tor, it's an excellent browser as far as privacy and security goes. One thing that's really important is that you do not come in here and start changing settings around. So like, let's say for example, so one of the things that they run is a no script extension. You should not delete or disable this. Everything should stay as it is, because then you're making your fingerprint different. The other thing is that Tor launches in a default window size every single time. So the other thing, for maximum protection against things like fingerprinting, you should not resize the window. Now, like that's maybe going into a level of paranoia where I'm not one of those super paranoid people, so I don't really care all that much. But this could be important to some people. Where let's say you resize it, this can all of a sudden make you the unique person that stands out that has like you're running a browser window at some weird resolution, whereas other people aren't. So that when you launch Tor up for the first time, whenever you close out and launch up Tor, it will come up to a default window size. For maximum protection, you should keep it at that default size. Overall, I do think it's an excellent browser, but I also would say that it's really not all that great for like everyday. You could use it for everyday browsing. There's the speed issue is one thing that you need to take into effect. Like let's say you've got gigabit internet. Well, you're not going to get nearly close to that speed if you're browsing around on Tor. The other thing is, like, I also wouldn't recommend using it for things like logging into banks because you're very likely going to end up tripping things like fraud detection, and it's probably also going to be the same thing for merchant websites. Basically, anything where you have to log in, and there's really would be no reason at all to use it if you're going to log into something like Facebook or Twitter or whatever. So it's an interesting case because I normally would put it at an S tier, but there are a few things like obviously, like you wouldn't want to use it to log into a banking website, and there's special considerations that go along with using it. So I'm dropping it in the niche category, but I do think it's an excellent browser. I have absolutely nothing against Tor. It's just not something that everyone needs to use, in my opinion. All right, next one. Let's cover LibreWolf. This is absolutely one of my favorite browsers. I'm going to cover why. This is hardened Firefox out of the box. So when you install this, it's forked from Firefox, meaning that you get all the benefits of Firefox, but some extra stuff built on top of it. So when you launch up LibreWolf, you can come in here and take a look and see that they have things that are already configured for the most privacy. So things like on Firefox, for example, as they collect telemetry, which you have to go shut off after the fact. And then there's things like shortcuts, recent activity. You don't need any of that stuff. They have DuckDuckGo enabled by default, which is fine. I don't have an issue with it. And then they have enhanced tracking protection. They've turned off the cookie collection. It deletes cookies and site data as soon as you close the browser. All of this stuff's disabled, which again, I mean, I would recommend this if you're going to use Firefox, that you should go in there and do that. One of the things that I like is it forces HTTPS only mode in all windows, whereas with vanilla Firefox, this option is only selected for private windows, which makes absolutely no sense to me. I don't know why we're still doing this, because any website that does not have an SSL certificate, I don't know what the hell the owner of the website is doing these days if they can't get an SSL certificate for their website. And then the other thing, so you can come in here and turn this on where you can use different DNS providers, or if you're going to turn it on at the operating system level, it's just turned off, which again, completely fine. It also has uBlock Origin installed by default, which is great. There's two things that I could hold against LibreWolf, and one can be worked around, and the other is really not its fault just because of how it works. So it mentions here that, okay, you're using resist fingerprinting. So with as strict as like the tracking protection and fingerprinting and all that stuff is, it's very rare that I've had this happen. But it can break some websites where websites won't load properly, and so if you run into that issue, what you could do is fire up Brave or Vivaldi or something like that, open it up in one of those browsers, and the website should work fine. It's been extremely rare that I've had that happen, but it is a possibility that it could come up. That's just because of how strict it is. Also, by default, LibreWolf does not automatically update like the other browsers, so you do have to update it manually. Now, there is an option where you can set it up to do that automatically. It would be nice if they just did that out of the box, but it's really not an issue. It's easy to work around, and you can set it up so you can set up a service, like on Windows, for example, you can set up a service so that it automatically updates the browser. So this one is a solid S tier, definitely one of my favorite browsers for sure. All right, the next one, Firefox. This one also elicits a lot of strong feelings from people, which I get to an extent. Some of the complaints seem kind of ridiculous to me. Now, one of the things is, and I don't agree with this, Firefox does collect telemetry. So one of the things is you do have to go into settings and turn that off. We'll also need to go in and install an ad blocker, which the only one I recommend is uBlock Origin, but you can use whatever you want. Now, the thing is you can turn all this garbage off. So you can turn off things like shortcuts. and recommended by Pocket, which is what I do. It's just more of a distraction anyway. And you can go in and customize things like turning off all of the telemetry. You can turn up the security settings if you want to, like you could turn that to strict. You could turn off the autofill, which I don't recommend using the browser autofill. I don't recommend saving passwords in a browser. I would recommend a password manager. You can turn off the data collection. Okay, I was actually wrong. For some reason, I thought this was by default only on private windows. So it doesn't have HTTPS only mode enabled at all. Again, I think it's absolutely ridiculous that they do that, but it is what it is, I guess. You can work around it easily, I suppose. Now, there is something that I do think people need to be aware of. If you're going to set up stuff for Firefox custom, then I would recommend at least considering disabling WebRTC. Now, WebRTC is a communication protocol that I know Jitsi uses it, I think Zoom uses it, and probably Teams. Like this here, if you're trying to connect through other people through a web browser, like one of those video conferencing services. The thing is that if you have that enabled, your real IP address could get leaked to other websites or to like a malicious actor, for example. So let's say you want to run a VPN and you're browsing around through Firefox and you have WebRTC enabled. It is a security risk where your real IP address could potentially get leaked. So I do think it's important for you to at least consider disabling WebRTC, which you do by going to About, Config, and the address bar. It's going to ask you, do you really want to make changes? And then you have to search for Media, Peer Connection, Enabled. Just realize that if you do, you're not going to be able to use certain services like I said, I think it's Zoom, Teams, Jitsi, all of that, any of those video conferencing services if you're trying to do it over a web browser. And as far as the manifest stuff goes with Firefox, from what I've been able to gather so far is that Firefox is going to manifest version 3, but they do plan on keeping certain features of version 2, specifically as it has to do with things like being able to use ad blockers and do regular updates to ad blockers, and I think that's important. So as long as they continue down that path, I think that's good. Now, as far as where I would put it on the tier list, it would depend on what it is that you want to do. If we're just taking this out of the box as is, I would actually put it under not terrible, so I would give it a B rank. Now, if you're going to go and harden it and set it up with things like uBlock, Origin, and go and shut off all the telemetry and all that garbage, then I would absolutely put it at S tier. The other thing that people can do if they want is they could run the Arkenfox hardening script on there. The thing is that's going to turn settings up so much that you might as well also have just like LibreWolf or Mullvad install, which get to Mullvad here pretty soon. But that is an option. But like I said, if you're not pre-hardening and having it set up properly, I would put it at B tier. And then I would have it at S tier if you're going to set it up properly, which for the people that watch my channel, I figure they're probably going to customize things to get it as private and secure as it needs to be. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it at S tier. Now, let's go ahead and move to my favorite browser. If there was an S plus tier on here, which I didn't want to create for the purposes of this video, if there was an S plus tier, I'm just going to spoil it now. That is where I would put the Mullvad browser. And let me tell you why. So let me go ahead and fire this up here real quick. There's a few reasons why. Now, some of the people in the Privacy Guides community got a little bit upset when Privacy Guides, I think they dumped LibreWolf from their top suggestion and moved to Mullvad, which I didn't really agree with them taking LibreWolf out of there. I do think these are both excellent browsers. The thing that I really like with Mullvad is it's built off of the Tor browser, which Tor is built off of Firefox. But the thing with the Tor browser is there's extra settings that are set up to do things like resist fingerprinting and protect you against things like that. And so, for example, you'll notice one of the things is letterboxing. So when you load up websites, you'll notice a lot of websites will have like a small gray outline around the window. That's to protect against things like canvas fingerprinting, which is built into the Tor browser. Now, this was actually a good move on Mullvad's part because they are doing this as an effort to be able to, I think, bring more effort or more attention to their VPN service. They offer this for free, which is, I mean, a great thing. Now, you get all the benefits of the Tor browser, which means you get extra protection against things like fingerprinting. It automatically clears out everything. As soon as you close the browser, it clears everything out. And if you go into the settings here, there are a couple of things that I want to mention that people should be aware of if you're going to use this browser. So let's go ahead and go over to privacy and security. You can change this. I don't think that it's really necessary. One of the things that's important to keep in mind here is down here for the DNS settings. So let's say you have something enabled at the router or at the operating system level that already has encrypted DNS set up. You can run into loading issues where the website won't be able to load stuff properly and it'll hang. It'll take like a minute or two and then you'll get like a page showing it's having trouble loading because of DNS problems. If you're running into that, you would need to come in here and turn this off to fix that. That's if you already have encrypted DNS applied like system-wide or through the router. If you don't already have that set up, you can just leave this by default though. It works just fine. You get all the benefits of encrypted DNS, which I made a video a while back talking about how you can prevent malware using encrypted DNS, and I did a pretty good breakdown there. I'll recommend watching that if you haven't already, because I'll tell you why this is such a good option to go with here, having encrypted DNS, and then you get all the benefits of malware filtering. Now the other thing is, and you don't have to you don't have to remove this one if you don't want to. You could just go ahead and leave it so no script and uBlock Origin are installed and enabled. It works just fine. Now, like with LibreWolf, I have had it where this can break a couple of websites. Like I said, it's been extremely rare. I've been running a lot of testing on this browser. It's been working great so far. There's only been a couple of websites that had issue. One of the things that you could run into a lot of issues with this is those ridiculous captchas where it's like, oh, prove you're not a robot, fill out the text that you see in this box, and then I've noticed sometimes you can end up in this infinite loop where you successfully complete the challenge, but it just keeps reloading it, but then it goes away if you use something like a Brave browser. So if you have something with loading issues on the Mullvad browser, it's pretty easy to work around. You can just go ahead and use something like Brave, but this is absolutely an S-tier browser, definitely one of my favorite. For privacy and security, it is definitely up there with LibreWolf and hardened Firefox. Now, we'll talk about Safari briefly. This is an interesting one. If you're going to run like iOS, like let's say an iPhone or an iPad, it's going to be a good option. You can use Brave on those as well. If you're going to be using the Mac OS, you could also use one of the other options. Safari's pretty good though. I do like it. One of the things that it does have is private access tokens. Now, there's a lot of trust that has to be placed in this system, or it's not private access tokens. There's the private relay, and there's obviously a lot of trust that has to be placed in this. They want to, I think they were trying to make it similar to like using a multi-hop VPN or the Tor browser, where you connect to like an Apple server, so it knows the IP that you're connecting to, and then it goes to a different server who only knows the exit IP, so then it connects to that browser. I would say the closest way to look at it would be similar to like a multi-hop VPN. I do think it's okay. You can also enable always private browsing in there, so that anytime you close it out, everything gets cleared out inside of there. I think that's fine. And if you want to block ads, uBlock Origin is not available on Safari. So about the best option that's out there is something called AdGuard. So overall, I'd say it's a good browser. I definitely wouldn't place it in S tier. I would place it actually between these two tiers. Like if this is A and a B, I would say it would be like a B plus. So I'll just put it in the A tier and we'll call it good there. All right, next one. Let's talk about Waterfox briefly. This one is, I like the browser. I don't really have anything bad to say about it, though there are some things to keep in mind if you do want to use this. And it's interesting, as I'm trying to load it up for this video, it decides to freeze up on me. This is a more lightweight version of Firefox. I don't know what in the hell is wrong with this thing here. It's not working. So Waterfox is a bit of an interesting one. It's forked, obviously, from Firefox. It is a privacy-focused browser, and so there's things like telemetry and all that stuff's disabled on there. The issue with it is that it's a little slow to get updates, and so like the issue that I talked about with the WebP vulnerabilities earlier, that could be an issue that if you're going to just use this as your daily driver, there could be some security concerns of you going and doing that. I also would not recommend the Waterfox Classic Edition because there are unpatched vulnerabilities on there that could actively be used by attackers. So if you're going to use it, I would recommend just using the latest version of Waterfox. Overall, I'd say it's a good browser. The other thing to consider is it does have a pretty small support base, and so I mean, I would guess you could compare it, like the closest analogy would be if Chrome was like this big, massive complex with a bunch of armed guards, but there's also a lot of entrances, then it needs to be more heavily guarded. Whereas you could take Waterfox as like this small building that's maybe a couple of thousand square feet and a couple of guards, but it could also be easier to get into potentially. I think it's a pretty decent browser overall. I would place it in a B tier just because of the slow updates are, for me, kind of an issue because we're talking about security and privacy here. I do think those slow updates are a bit of an issue with this browser. And then there's also the fact that your fingerprint is also going to be somewhat unique on this one because I don't think there's really all that big of a user base for this one, but there's enough there that I wanted to mention the browser. All right, let's briefly cover Opera. So this company used to be Norwegian based originally, similar to Vivaldi, which is also a Norwegian based company. Opera ended up selling. Now, Opera sells itself as a privacy-focused browser. There are things with like built-in ad blocker that I do think is great. Now, I do have some issues with installing and using Opera on any of my devices. I'm not going to go into a bunch of depth here because people love to get into these geopolitical shit-flinging contests of, oh, well, I'm from the Eastern Hemisphere and I don't see any issues with using it. It's like, okay, well, that's great. Then go ahead and use it. I don't care. To me, using Opera would be like using TikTok. I'm not going to use it just because of the connections that the company has. I'm not going to go in depth because, like I said, this is not I'm not going to get into this geopolitical shit of East versus West and all that kind of thing, but I think people who already know about the company's background know where I'm going with it, and the ones that aren't, you can very easily find out why it is that I'm saying this if you just go and do a search through Wikipedia, search about the CEO and the ties of the parent company. So this one is firmly a no from me. Now, are these others in here? These were from Tier Maker. I didn't include these. These were already here, so I'm not going to talk about any of those. Now, one thing I'm going to mention real quick, because people might say, oh, well, you didn't mention my favorite esoteric browser, like Iceweasel, for example, which is built for Debian. If it was such a small or a hyper-focused browser, then that's why I did not talk about it here. I wasn't going to talk about everyone. This covers the big ones pretty well. I know there's some others out there. I really didn't see them as having enough adoption to really warrant talking about them. Like I said, if it's tied to like a specific distro, for example, it's like, okay, well, that doesn't even apply to Windows users, whereas all of these browsers are available for people to use. So, well, except for Safari, but there's a huge Apple user base. So that is where all of the browsers sit as far as I'm concerned, from a security and privacy perspective. If you have any issues with what I said, go ahead and drop a comment. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of hate comments in this video because people love to get all sorts of passionate and get worked up about their favorite browser and browsers that they don't like and ones that they do like, and oh, well, your opinion doesn't align with mine. That's just my opinion. And opinions are like assholes. Everyone has one and they smell like shit. So there's that. Anyway, it's gonna wrap the video up. If you made it this far, we are 46 minutes in so far, pre-editing. So if you made it this far, shout out to you. I appreciate the support as always. With all that being said, I will see you in the next video.